Hey guys, it's Danny. Welcome to another live stream. Today I am here to answer all of your orchid questions, whether we're talking about when will my orchid bloom, how do I water a phalaenopsis, culture tips, all sorts of things you want to know, I'm here to answer. But of course, I brought a few orchids here with me, so I'm not so lonely here. And I will show you a few things on these orchids as well, but mainly I want to focus on the questions that you guys might have about orchids. So before we go into that, let me just say hi to everybody here in the chat room. I see a lot of you guys. Hello, Macon. Linda, thank you so much for becoming a member just now. Hello, Valerie, Chelsea, Pam, Tristan, Macon. I missed you yesterday, but I'm glad you're here. Next week, we're gonna do another stream. Boreal, Desiree. Hi guys, how are you doing? How is the quarantine treating you? I hope everything is okay. Hello, Linda. Thank you so much for becoming a member. Wow, you guys are awesome. But yeah, let me know how you are doing. I have to say, I'm starting to feel a little bit the pressure because I'm going through orchid withdrawals. I did not purchase or order any orchids in like 2 months, 3 months now. Yeah, it's not okay. Did you guys manage to purchase any orchids? Did you order? How did that go for you? Raymond, Peter, Dewey. Hi Dewey, nice to see you here. So happy you made it. Britta, hello. How are you doing? You missed the live stream as well, but it's okay. Next stream. Tatiana, Jay, I hope you're all doing super well. Thank you so much for joining me today. And as I was saying, if you have questions regarding anything related to orchids, let us begin, shall we? So before we actually, oh yeah, let's address the elephant in the room. Thank you for reminding me, Ashley. Yes, today I'm sporting Garden Answer because I am a big fan. I have been a fan for the past few years and it's my favorite YouTube channel at the moment. So yeah, plus these hoodies, you guys, are very comfy. Okay, Patty, you just placed an order last night. Yeah, I think Laura will love it. Alrighty, so regarding the orchids that I got here in front of us, I tried to get a few different types of orchids. So if you have an Oncidium question, I can show you this lovely orchid, which by the way, is one of those orchids that smells like chocolate. If you weren't aware, if you're a beginner, Oncidium, Cherry Baby, and a few others are very known for smelling like chocolate. And this is the Redolence one, which looks just a little bit tidier, has a little bit prettier flowers, but it smells beautifully like chocolate. So I think if you're interested in Oncidiums, you should definitely start with this. Of course, Phalaenopsis. It is Phalaenopsis season. For some of you guys, I believe it is the season for the flowers to fall. So if you have any questions on what should we do after everything falls, then we can absolutely talk about it. I live in a warmer climate, so my phals are in full bloom. I have the pretty slipper orchids here, and now I know quite a lot more about slippers than I did a few years ago. But really, any question you have about any orchid that I know of is welcome. Boreal, oh my goodness, yes, I miss my Oncidium pupukea so much. I actually purchased it or repurchased it about a year ago. It didn't make it. It wasn't a good one. Miranda, soft rot on a Dendrobium spectaculae. I cut off the affected cane and leaf. What do I do now to prevent this spread? Well, if you manage to remove all of that affected tissue, theoretically there is nothing to spread. However, since rot is a sort of fungus, it produces spores. So after you remove all of that affected part, which is the darkened part and a little bit of the good tissue, it's a very good idea to spray the entire plant with a fungicide if you use fungicides, or hydrogen peroxide 3%, because that kills any spore you might have. And afterwards, let the orchid dry super well, and be sure that you don't have excess drops of water on the canes so that the orchid can get reinfected. And where you cut the cane, put a little bit of ground cinnamon, let it dry, and it should be just fine afterwards. I think the spread will be contained. Sonia, you have a keiki that was the plant for several months and you just separated it yesterday because it was dying. How can you help it survive? Well, first of all, what type of keiki do you have? Are you talking about Dendrobium or Phalaenopsis? Let's assume Phalaenopsis because those are the ones who produce most keikis. If it has roots, you can pot it separately. Make sure that the medium is airy and make sure that you provide water and it should be just fine. If it doesn't have roots, do check my videos for the ICU setup that I have with orchids, with sick orchids and rootless orchids, and you'll see how I go about it. But if it has roots, it will be just fine. Britta, I know, it's so nice to have warmer climates and have orchids still in bloom. Macon, thank you so much, you're a sweetheart. Thank you for the super chat. If it's in your possibility, go and become an emoji member. Let's support Danny, the amazing work she put out first. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. You're a sweetheart. Boreal is saying that one of the lowest leaves, not the lowest though, is yellowing. It's not mushy, but it's yellowing and shriveled. Is it nothing or just natural shedding? Well, I think we talked about this before on Discord. If it's like the lowest leaf, it should be absolutely fine. But sometimes it happens that the upper leaves, which are very, very old, they will actually shed before these bottom ones. So if it's a very, very old leaf on your orchid, and I'm just realizing you don't actually see what I'm showing you. So if it's a very, very, very old leaf here, then it's okay. You can see on mine that I have a very old leaf here, which is very tiny. This is set back actually. So if this yellows and falls, I'm not going to be worried about it. But presumably, if you have a few more leaves and one in the middle starts to yellow and fall, that's something that you should definitely investigate. It doesn't appear to be normal. Don't get very scared about it. But yeah, just try to figure out what leaf is falling and definitely keep your eye on it. Even if it's normal, if you're paying attention, you're going to solve problems faster. Gabby, any tips on how to grow Dendrobium Phalaenopsis types? Yes, of course. So I do have a tutorial, of course, but they are super easy plants. Just think Phalaenopsis, but with super, super bright light and hot temperatures. They are the orchids that do the best for me outside because they love the sun, they love the heat. Be careful with direct sun because they can get sunburned. Other than that, the hottest you can keep them, the brightest you can keep them, the better. When it comes to watering, water them just like a Phalaenopsis. When the medium is dry, you can give them a good watering and then wait for them to dry out. They're very, very drought tolerant. They absolutely hate cold. They will not grow, they will not bloom well. I had it happen. So that's the only thing they absolutely hate. Other than that, they're a sort of supercharged Phalaenopsis. Virginia has a question. If I have a plant with just 2 flowers and one of them falls, should I be concerned? No, absolutely not, because we need to think about the context. If the orchid was in bloom for the past 3 months, then one of the flowers falling is absolutely perfect. If the flower that fell just opened, let's say yesterday or 2 days ago, it might be an issue, yes, in your environment. But usually flowers don't necessarily tell us if the orchid is healthy or not. We can have orchids that bloom beautifully, but if you look at their root system, it's horrible. And this is because they just put all of their energy into their blooms. So check the orchid, check the roots, the leaves, and if everything looks okay, it's absolutely fine. Sometimes flowers might fall due to some environmental changes. If you moved the orchid around a bit too much, maybe it didn't really appreciate that all that much, but it's not really, falling flowers really don't mean anything in 99% of the cases. You're welcome, Virginia. Habib, how are your Cattleya ceilings doing in sphagnum moss and bark? Perfect. I will do an update very, very soon on them. I do have a list of subjects that I really want to do, and I have this subject on my list as well. They are growing so much faster. This is the first year that I keep them outside since they're hot growers. I'm not going to baby them anymore. Some of them are progressing to a bigger pot, so that's always good news. Oh, Virginia, my pleasure. Annabelle, is it normal that my medium stays wet for a very long time? Well, it depends what very long means, because maybe for me 7 days is not very long, but for you it might be. I'm not a fan of rules, okay? But for the purpose of making this a little bit easier to understand, I would say that if the medium of your orchid, no matter what type of orchid you have, except let's say Masdevallias, if your medium stays wet for 10 days and it's still rather damp, then it might be a little too condensed. It might not be airy enough. So if it's 10 days, yes, maybe you should investigate. If it's 7 days, I don't know, consider your environment. If it's rather cool, maybe it's not bad. Generally speaking, it is better for a medium to dry out a little bit faster than too long, than stay wet too long. But it really depends. Susan is saying that her orchid is about 10 feet from the window. Is that enough light? It's not direct sun. 10 feet. Let me think about, I think 10 feet is about, I'm not good with these measurements. I think it's okay. If it's bright shade, it's perfectly fine. And the way you can actually maximize a little bit your light is by making sure that around your orchid, you don't have very dark things. So if you have white walls, or maybe you can place some white decorations around the orchid, trust me, that's gonna make a huge difference. I actually keep my Phalaenopsis next to a white wall, or I used to, and to my surprise, many of them started to grow their flower spikes towards the wall. So yeah, that's how much of a difference it can make. I think it's okay. Brita is saying that she always has issues with the bottom of the medium staying wet and the top part dry. And I think I tend to overwater because it only has new roots which are on the top half. Yes. Here's the trick. Except for what we can do, like aeration holes, layering the medium so that it doesn't actually stay very wet at the bottom, we also need to think a little bit about the orchid that we have. If the orchid only has top roots, then even with our measures, it's still going to be a little layered. So I say that if you're gonna just sprinkle a little water on the top roots a little bit more often, you don't actually need to super soak the medium. I would soak the medium once a week just to make sure that everything is super soaked, or once every 2 weeks or something like that. In the meantime, just spray the top of the medium. How much, Alifa is asking me, how much parts per million of salt can orchids handle? Well, it depends what type of salt it is. It depends what type of fertilizer. If it's a well-balanced fertilizer, they should have these measurements on the label. And I will give you the measurements of my MSU. I think it says 250 parts per million in the summertime and less in the winter time. But you have to adjust this to the orchid that you have. If you have a heavy feeder, like a big Phalaenopsis, I think you can throw anything at it. And last year, I literally dumped the excess fertilizer that I had from the garden into my Phalaenopsis. It's okay. But if we're talking about even Oncidiums, Miltoniopsis, and things of the sorts, I would not overdo it with that. Hi, Emily. Okay, you are asking me that about an Oncidium. Oh, my redolence. Is there anything special needed to reblooming this Oncidium? Temperature drop, being blessed by orchid gods? Yeah, something of the sorts. Actually, I will be fully honest with you. I know that articles suggest that Oncidium type orchids, and especially cherry babies, are signaled by a drop in temperature at night to bloom or in the season. I've never really experienced it that much, or at least not consciously, because they just bloom. Whenever a new pseudobulb matures, they send out a flower spike. Even in the middle of summer, I had it happen. So whether this difference between day and night is just not big enough for me to notice it, whether it's just not so important, I don't know. If you find that you have issues with your Oncidiums and you know your environment is very stable temperature-wise, definitely I would try it out. But I don't think it's something to be so worried about. Brita, oh no! But I think she managed to break the end of a new root the other day. I do that a lot, a lot. Colin, this might be a stupid question, but when you refer to the amount of humidity an orchid prefers, is this in regards to leaves, roots, or the entire plant? You know what? Awesome question. Because I don't actually talk all that much about humidity since I don't find it that important, that's a different story. When we refer to relative humidity or humidity generally, we talk about the general humidity in the air around the orchid. The humidity at a root level can be 100% because when we water the orchid and the medium is super soaked with water, obviously the humidity there can be 100%. But that's pretty normal and we don't refer to it. Typically people try to raise humidity around orchids because it helps. But if you know exactly what it does, you can kind of work around it. What it does is maintain the orchid less prone to becoming dehydrated through transpiration. The drier the air is, the more water the orchid will lose through its leaves, through transpiration. And vice versa. If it's very humid, the water loss will not be so extreme. However, with many orchids that we can grow in our home, humidity levels are not super important because we do take care to water these orchids in time. We don't have watering issues like they would encounter in nature. They usually grow in very harsh conditions. However, there are a few species which do tend to like high humidity, Miltoniopsis, Nellie Eiler. Those are some of them simply because they don't have very thick cuticles around their leaves. So the water loss is a little bit more extreme with them if we compare them to Phalaenopsis or Cattleyas. So in their case, because they're just prone to lose water, yes, higher humidity makes a bit of a difference, more difference than with Phalaenopsis. But with things like Phalaenopsis and any hot grower that you can grow in your home, humidity is not so important. But that's what we refer to. Danaya is asking, why are my aerial roots always dried out and how do I keep them moist? Well, aerial roots are supposed to be dry and I shall show you. The aerial roots on my Phalaenopsis hybrid here, what are you? Yeah, Rhenanthopsis. Rhenanthera, which is a vendaceous orchid, as well as the Phalaenopsis, has a great tendency to produce a lot of roots in the air. And as you can see, the roots on my orchid are extremely dry. And this is because I don't actually water them consciously. I only water the inside of the pot because this is what's most important for me. The vast majority of roots are inside the medium. So as you can see, my roots are not growing at the moment because it became rather hot outside, but all winter long they grew. They will stop growing all summer, and then when winter comes and humidity is a little higher in my environment, they will start growing again. But it doesn't really impact the orchid way too much. An instance in which aerial roots do matter is when you manage to lose all of the roots inside the pot. Practically root rot. Aerial roots can save you, but it doesn't mean that you need to constantly water them to maintain them alive. If you have issues, just spray them from time to time or maybe soak them from time to time, but you don't necessarily have to actively do anything about it, in my opinion. It's all up to you though. If you have the time and you like to spray a little bit the aerial roots, that's great. Noksha, you have a question. Is it bad to move orchids often? I'm putting my catasetums in a greenhouse during the day to jumpstart them and taking them back indoors for the night because it's still too cold until June. Now, it's absolutely okay with catasetums because at this particular moment in time, they don't actually tend to grow way too much. They're just starting to produce their little growths. And by the way, let me just show you something really fast. For those of you who know my channel, you know that I took some cuttings from my affected catasetums. They are starting to produce new growth. There we go. So video will come soon. So at this stage in the seasons, they're already putting out tiny new growth. It's not a very crucial time in their life at this point, so you can definitely move them. Just make sure that you don't jiggle them way too much because they're growing roots right now. If you jiggle them too much, maybe you're gonna break the roots, but have very strong roots. I wouldn't worry, but just be careful with that. I think I did that at some point with my Phalaenopsis. Long time ago, I used to put them in an open balcony that I have, which would get cool down, and then I would bring them in the daytime into the other balcony. And it was okay. But the crucial moments are when the orchids are growing flower spikes and buds and flowers. Those are times in which you don't really want to move orchids. You're welcome. Guido, your Vanda is a tricolor and it's dehydrating because you received it with no roots. How can you save it? Well, Vandas, just as Phalaenopsis and any other orchid, will be prompted to produce roots when they remain rootless. The chemistry inside the orchid will change, stomata will shut as much as possible, so to limit water loss, changes will happen through the orchid. And one of the changes, or the effects, is promoting new roots. So on its own, it should start to create roots. But if you want to help them out when they start to grow, I would suggest trying to make a sort of ICU setup for it. Try to place it on top of a little bit of sphagnum moss, not necessarily touching the sphagnum moss, but just maintain the area a little bit more humid. Again, if you search my channel for ICU, you will see what I mean, or just search rootless orchids. I would go about it just like with any other orchid. Mage Thought, hi, I didn't see you in a lot of time. Thank you for dropping by. Do I advise getting an air purifier to improve the air quality in an apartment setup? As you may or may not know, apartment air is dusty and not really the best for epiphytic plants. Oh, I know. And by the way, I have an even dustier situation because I have dusty birds. So I was actually looking into air purifiers. To be fully honest, I would purchase an air purifier more for your health than for the health of the orchid. I have orchids which sometimes get so dusty, I get caught up with so many things, and it's okay, nothing bad happens to them. If you have the availability just to wipe a little bit the foliage, that's fine. So if the situation is very dusty, get it for your health, not for the orchid, and the orchid might actually benefit as well. Gabby, the media, your media, orchid media, is wet for the past 7 to 8 days and the roots are still green. What should I do? Well, depends on the instance. If your orchid is freshly repotted, then I might try to go about it in the sense of trying to improve air circulation around the pot. Maybe if your pot doesn't have air holes or ventilation slits, maybe try to puncture a few, even with the orchid inside if you're careful. And work to improve a little bit the ventilation inside. However, if your orchid is due for a repot, I would definitely repot it. Again, depends on the context. If the medium is old, it might actually be a sign that it's decomposing and breaking down. Bark, even though it doesn't actually retain water, it's a very hard material. When it starts to decompose and it loses its integrity, it starts to keep water in so much, and that's not a good sign. So if I was you, I would repot it, to be fully honest, if the medium is old. Desiree, do I own a Phalaenopsis gigantea? I do. I just purchased it before the quarantine, like about 2.5 months ago or 3 months ago. And it's not a fully mature orchid, it's rather tiny, but I'm really excited because the foliage looks very interesting. I will make a video on it very soon. Sophie, you have a question for me. Do my Neophoenicia buds open yet? Thoughts on the scent? Very curious. They didn't open just yet. I think I posted a picture on Instagram today. They're still closed, so I think it's going to be a few more days. Britta, you say you have the True HEPA filter running 24/7. It also circulates the air very well, like a constant breeze. And the air humidifier was not purchased. They benefit from it. Yeah, so Britta, if you have more to tell us about these, do tell us more, because as I was saying, we were actually thinking of getting a air purifier as well for the birds. I mean, against the birds. Șoricel Gras. Ce nickname ai? Hi, I'm struggling with the vanilla orchid that remained without roots, and for the love of God, I cannot root it again. Do you have any tips and tricks? Well, search on my channel, potting or rooting vanilla cuttings. You'll see my first video on it. I didn't do much. I just made sure that the bottom of the cutting was sealed, and I think I used wax Nowadays I use hot glue and it works. I made sure that the cut was viable, it was green and healthy, and then I just inserted it in medium, and hey presto, it kind of grew. But maybe I did something that you might find useful, so do search for that video. Zoe, I know you had bought surprise boxes of orchids and you're happy with the ones you got, and would you recommend others to buy from them again? If you do, can you please send the website? I think you're referring to the mystery unboxing that I did, mystery box from Orchids Deluxe. Yes. Do I have an orchid from... I think... Okay, I'm not sure. Maybe I received this one in the mystery box, or maybe I purchased it together. I personally was very happy with the mystery box because I just love surprises. If you're the type of person who wants to know beforehand what you're gonna receive, you're probably gonna hate it, but I wanted to be surprised. And Orchids Deluxe have a wide array of Phalaenopsis polychilus, Neophoenicias, all sorts of stuff that do you mind? They're still awake. So all sorts of stuff that I don't have in my collection. If they would have a lot of Oncidiums, a lot of Cattleyas that I already have, I would have gotten doubles most probably, and I wouldn't have been so happy with it. But I personally am happy because they sent me plants that I didn't have, and I would definitely recommend it. They're very good plants, but you know how it is. Some people will not be happy. They might encounter some problems sometimes. It is how it is, but I personally am happy, and you can see the unboxings on my channel. Patty, you think I'm tiny? How can you tell? Thank you though. Rubayat, oh, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Can you please help me with the care tips for Asconopsis Irene Dobkin? Yes. It's a bit of a finicky orchid. I first lost mine a year ago. This is not that one. I lost mine a year ago to stem rot. So first of all, with that type of orchid, I would be very careful with putting water in the crown and letting it sit there or in between the leaves. I think it has a slight sensitivity to that. Second, I would try to maintain the medium very, very airy. Since it's a hybrid with a Vendacious orchid, it's not as tolerant to the potting medium as other Phalaenopsis are. And third, I would make sure with the watering that you don't overdo it. So I would rather keep the orchid rather dry than wet. Other than that, I give it plenty of light, not a lot of direct sunshine because it can burn, but more than Phalaenopsis. And I think that's about it. I fertilize it together with my other orchids, but yeah, I think the main thing you should focus on is the medium and roots. Hi, Maria Pan, sorry. Edia May, if I was a plant, if your plant attached your orchids to, oh, hold on. If I attach my plants or my orchids to the trees outside, what happens when it rains? I don't live in a place where it rains often, but since we aren't supposed to let the leaves stay wet, no, in our cultivation, we grow our orchids upright, right? Well, in nature, they would grow something like this, because in the back here, instead of the, whatever we grow our orchids in, instead of the pot, you'd have the tree. So the orchid would face downwards, it would droop downwards, and the water would just run off of the leaves. So it doesn't apply. Nature plays by different rules. We play by totally different rules. So whatever I'm saying here, I'm usually saying for living rooms, for potted orchids, not the outside world, because that's a whole different story. So if you have the type of environment that can support an orchid being grown outside, you can definitely put it on the tree. And if it doesn't rain every single day 24/7 for a month, then I think it's gonna be okay. Colin, what is my bark and moss ratio for something like a phal versus a cattleya? Well, it's kind of similar, but only because I grow my cattleyas outside, and I do need a little bit more sphagnum moss in their mix just to keep them more hydrated. But if I would grow them in the same room, let's say, or in the same place, I would make sure that the cattleyas don't have as much sphagnum moss. Maybe I would use 20%, 30% sphagnum moss with the cattleyas, and with the Phalaenopsis, I would go to 50%, just because they can handle it and just because they drink water so fast that I would be too lazy to water them. Hi Adam, hi, how easy are slipper orchids to keep? Well, now I find them easy, but it took me a little bit to get the proper care because these guys, or some of them, some varieties are very, very sensitive when it comes to medium. First of all, they really don't like to dry out as much. They're not epiphytes, actually. They are terrestrial, semi-terrestrial. Some of them can be lithophytes, but even in that case, they are actually covered by leaves or debris or things of the sorts. So if you can see on these guys, you will never actually see aerial roots, and this is because they don't tolerate air. So first of all, you need to make sure that the medium can retain water for them, so you don't have to water them way too often. Second, you have to make sure that the medium is actually slightly acidic, and this, I believe, is the cause why my Paphiopedilums were not doing all that great in inorganic medium, no matter how much I kind of watered them. So I believe for these guys, acidity matters, just because they grow in leaf debris. Or leaf debris. Other than that, they're super easy. I don't have issues with them with humidity. With light, they're the same as with the Phalaenopsis. So from this point of view, they're actually very, very easy. They grow slow, but two things, water and acidity. At least that's my opinion. Other than that, pretty easy to grow. Johnny is saying that when they first bought their first Phalaenopsis, they were wondering if it's a fussy or hardy type of orchid. Well, in comparison to other things, it's a very hardy orchid. I will not say that it's, so hard to kill, because you can obviously really damage an orchid. It has its soft spots. And with Phalaenopsis, it just happens that it's the crown, which is the very top of the orchid, and in between the leaves. Again, because we typically grow them upright and water just pulls inside these structures, they're prone to having problems because pathogens accumulate. Also, in the living room, we don't have wind, we don't have as much ventilation, water doesn't evaporate, and who knows, maybe the bacterial and pathogen climate in our area in that particular moment is full of mold spores, who knows. So there are a few things that they are sensitive to, but overall they're very responsive when it comes to root loss, even leaf loss and things of the sorts. So they're hardy, but if you're a beginner, don't feel bad if you find them a little bit tricky. It's absolutely normal. Colin is asking if I have any care tips for Cattleya seedlings. Well, they are actually a little bit of more sensitive version of the big version. Yeah, the big version of the Cattleya, in the sense that when it comes to light, they absolutely love bright light, but they get damaged easier. When it comes to watering, they don't tolerate drought as well as the adults, which I can leave them on the terrace for a month and it's absolutely fine. But other than that, they're absolutely identical. They just require a little bit more water. Peter, you're saying your leaves are going slightly yellow. What can you do to fix this issue? Well, what type of orchid you have, first of all, because it might actually be normal. Some orchids are deciduous. So try to tell me what type of orchid you have, so I don't have to ask you and maybe lose your comment. Let's just say that you have a dendrobium. If it's a deciduous dendrobium, it's okay. Oh, tree. Did I try cakey paste on my Tolumnia spike? No, I didn't. So far, my Tolumnia is still in bloom and has that beautiful branch. You might have seen it in the Orchids in Bloom video. So I didn't use it just yet, but once the blooms fall, I might. I used the cakey grow paste on the Catasetum segment, if you remember. It's the only growth that didn't develop. It's the one that I treated. And this is, again, proof that all of these substances that we use can help and can promote stuff, but they're not miracle makers, you know? If the orchid does not want to, it will not want to. Noxa is asking if orchids can recover from viruses. Very, very good questions. And the answer is, as far as we know, no. So just like in human, viruses attack the plant in a very different way from bacteria and other things. And it's very hard to find a treatment because whatever treatment we try to apply will harm the orchid itself as well and its cells. So there are a few very well-known orchid viruses such as the Cymbidium mosaic virus and the Oncidium ring spot virus. There is no treatment for these types of ailments. As far as I know, there is a test, but at some point you can tell your orchid is going downhill. And in my experience, in the end, after a while, these orchids actually do go downhill. This being said, I do have my Phalaenopsis bellina, which you might know has the orchid fleck virus. I had a very bad infestation of spider mites on it, and spider mites can actually carry the orchid fleck virus. And now my bellina has all sorts of chlorotic spots. Although in recent years, it's starting to become less and less noticeable. So the only way in which a virus can be removed from an orchid is if the orchid's immune system fights it off. Other than that, all you can do is just help the orchid, make sure it's receiving good care, and that's it. Divya, what is keiki paste made of? Well, it's a jelly that contains plant hormones. I think cytokinins, because they are supposedly the ones that promote cell growth. I don't know them from the top of my head right now, but there are 4, I think, groups of hormones. Some of them determine elongation, some of them determine multiplication, and so on and so forth. So they're just a bunch of hormones, and if you apply them at the correct spot, they will alter the hormonal equilibrium in that spot. But what you're gonna get, who knows, because the orchid has already a balance there. So it's never anything for sure. Tristan is asking, how can I make my epidendrums branch out more? Well, epidendrums typically produce keikis. They don't necessarily branch out. They're sympodial orchids, so they will continuously produce new canes every single year. But from the top of the cane, where I'm guessing you're referring to reed stem epidendrums, from the top of the cane, you can actually have at some point keikis. And somebody actually told me the other day in a comment that even if in 1 year you don't see a keiki or a branch appearing, let it be, wait another year or 2, because at some point it might actually start to grow a keiki or a branch. They're actually keikis, they're not branches. Shorichel Gras, how can I become a member? The link is not working, says it's unavailable for purchase. You can go to the front page of my YouTube channel where it says subscribe, where those buttons are. And next to subscribe, you will see a join button. That's the membership join. I'm not entirely sure how you can join from this chat, but definitely on the front page, you will see it right there. And thank you so much for wanting to join. Anna, when should you fertilize a sick orchid that has keiki growing? I would fertilize them when they're actively growing, whether they're producing keikis or flowers. I would fertilize when you see new roots growing or new leaves growing. When they're not actively growing, they can actually rely on whatever resources they have stored. But of course, you have to read a little bit the orchid. If your orchid is perfectly healthy, has a really nice root system, very established, you can fertilize it normally. You don't have to restrain fertilizer, given if it's a continuous growing orchid, of course. The keiki will not affect anything, it's just there. So just treat it normally. But if it's rootless, wait until roots start to grow and then start with very low dosages and build your way up as the orchid establishes. Brita is asking us, how long does the Dendrobium parisi take to flower? Oh, long. Mine has been growing buds for over a month now, and they are definitely not flowering too soon. Just wondering, as this is my first parisi blooming, it can take a while. So for example, my Parishi is not actually budding just yet, only the anosmum. But if I look back in my archive, I can see my Parishi being in bloom in June or July or something like that. So if it starts right now to produce buds, it's going to take 2, 3, 4 months to grow those buds. It's a very slow process, and it's mainly influenced by the temperature outside. With most orchids, higher temperatures will determine a faster growth, even with flower spikes, because they increase the metabolism, and lower temperatures influence the orchid in a slower growth type of way. Steve, majority of oncidiums I grow seem to get the dreaded black spots, even though I tend to keep the leaves dry and only water the base. Well, if you're referring to oncidiums that have the sotoanum in their parentage, such as the cherry baby, the twinkles, the redolence, anything that smells a little sweet and has these tiny little flowers, having damage at the tip is to some extent normal. These orchids are notorious for having freckles and even a little bit of dieback. There are theories out there. Some people say it might be some sort of fungus. I personally disagree to that because I did not see any evidence of that. I heard a while back a American orchid expert saying that it has to do with temperature. If the temperature is not correct, they're gonna start to display these dots. And I have to say I kind of agree with that because I tried to grow these oncidiums outside. These are supposed to be hot growers. They really didn't like my outside, my summers. And when I tried to grow them outside, they got full of these spots, which meant dehydration, maybe some sort of tissue collapse due to some osmotic pressure. I don't know. There is something that they don't really like, and everybody has issues with them. So as long as you're not losing leaves entirely, I wouldn't worry too much about it, but I would just try to pipe down on fertilizer and water them in time just to stay safe, but I'm not sure if that's the cause. Hi Jack, glad to see you here. You're late though, but thank you so much for joining. Jacob, do you think a bulbophyllum would do well in a lechuza self-watering setup? Absolutely. I had my bulbophyllum, one of them, I don't remember the name, I had it in a self-watering pot. It was not a lechuza, it was just something else without a gauge, but the principle was absolutely identical, and it did beautifully. The problem is, these orchids grow on a horizontal. They have that rhizome which just creeps along the surface, and my self-watering pot was pretty narrow because of the reservoir. So what I decided to do is switch them to a basket, but when I kept them in self-watering, I had pure sphagnum moss inside, and on top I had a layer of bark, and it was absolutely fine. There might be some species which are not so water loving out there. I'm not an expert on bulbophyllums, but the ones that I know of, the ones that I have, and the ones that I read about, they all really like moisture, and they're not so easily damaged by, let's say, low circulation in the pot. Ivy, any updates on your cymbidiums? They're growing vegetatively. If you guys want, I could include them in an update video, maybe at some point, but now is the time they start to grow new pseudobulbs and new leaves. They're absolutely fine. They're outside on the terrace at the moment, but I think the most interesting part of the year will be autumn. And given that my autumn comes in December, let's say maybe next year we're gonna talk about them. No, I'm kidding. I'm gonna try to rebloom them this year on the terrace, so we'll talk more about them in the winter. Chris, do I have any Anguloa orchid? I don't. I have a Lycaste and I have a Baptistonia, which are, let's say, the most related orchids to the Anguloa, but I don't have that one yet. It's not on my wish list just yet, but I'm interested. I don't know. Colin, you are saying you just ordered a Dendrobium trigonopus. Any care tips? I've never heard of it, which is weird, but it sounds like it's a species. Do something. Go on Google and type the name of your orchid followed by orchid species. You'll find the website that tells you where this orchid comes from naturally, and it gives you some details if it's a hot grower, the altitude where it grows, what type of setup it has around it, if it grows on trees or in the grass or things of the sorts. With species, it's easy to find out these details on them, and then you can transform whatever you read in your little setup in your home. Britta, yes, they do take a lot of space. I have one, okay, it's kind of taller than what you see here, and it's like this at the moment. So if I would bring it here, it would not fit in this frame. But there are some tiny cymbidiums on the market as well. They are the Japanese cymbidiums or Chinese cymbidiums. I'm not sure at the moment because I don't actually have one. But there are some smaller ones on the market as well. The ones you find in flower shops, they're all big and they will all grow to humongous sizes. It's not an apartment plant unless you have a big apartment. Catherine is asking, what does the new growth on a cymbidium look like? It looks exactly like a oncidium or any other sympodial orchid. It's just a little triangular shape. Imagine oncidium growth, and that's how cymbidiums work as well. The spikes, though, they are much more rounder. Oh, really? Colin is saying that these orchids are lemon-scented flowers. Lemon candy. I'm definitely gonna buy one now. Do you have a species or a hybrid in mind? Let me know, because I really like that fragrance. Gabby is asking, what do I think about hanging orchids? Did you ever have one? Depends what you mean. There is such a thing as mounted orchids, in which you get the orchid and instead of putting it in a pot, you attach it to a piece of wood. I did have quite a few of them many years ago, 7 years ago, when I started to acquire more orchids, thinking that I would make a setup more, let's say, close to nature. Well, it turns out I could not keep up with the watering. I had to water them multiple times a day, and it was just infuriating at some point. So I gave them up. But do search on Google, Miss Orchid Girl, on YouTube actually, Miss Orchid Girl mounted orchids, and you'll see. Other than that, hanging orchids, I have my vandas potted in baskets, which are hung. So I'm okay with hanging orchids, but it depends what you mean by that. I wouldn't hang them upside down, though. That's a little side note. It's not practical for me, so maybe I should try it. It's a trend, I know it's a trend. Maybe I should try it in a video. David, how is Gloxinia collection going? It's fine. They're growing in the house. They're doing okay, and when they're gonna bloom, I'm finally gonna make a video about it. Adrienne is asking if I have some phalaenopsis that grow deeply curved flower spikes. The spike begins to grow while the top of it remains embedded in the plant, causing the stem, to curve. What causes this? Yes, I've had it happen a few times. I've seen it happen. There are a few possibilities, which again will depend on context. First of all, if an orchid is not properly hydrated, it will not have, let's say, strength. And the reasoning for this is osmotic pressure. When an orchid has the adequate amount of water inside its leaves and structures, they will be they will be completely spread. When the water is not in low quantities, they will kind of shrivel a little bit and become very flexible. So this, when a new structure grows, this translates into a very weak structure. So in the case of flower spikes, I don't think they have strength to puncture the leaf, which has a thick cuticle. So that's scenario number one, lack of water. Scenario number two, we have an issue, maybe a deformity at the axis level. I've seen orchids, and no, it's none of these. I have an orchid which produced two leaves so very, very close to each other that when the flower spike started to grow, it had to puncture both of those leaves because there was simply no space. So what it did was actually curl like a coma, and I didn't notice it until it was curled. So there are a few scenarios. First, work on hydration, and then, it just happens. Sometimes it's a little deformity there. Did I buy any orchid from Thailand via eBay? Because I did and don't have any answer from the seller. Chris is asking. I did many years ago, yet again. But they did a lot on transport because they had probably to pass through checks. Nowadays, I don't think they will pass through the checks because there are many phytosanitary rules in place, depends where you live. And furthermore, with whatever's going on in the world at the moment, there will be delays, a lot of delays in flights, in shipments, and so on. So it could be a multitude of things happening. But yeah, typically they take a lot of time to arrive if you're not on that particular continent. Yes, Habib, what question do you have? I wanted to ask something about your Hoya. So what happened? How did you lose them? I was badly surprised because, at least for me, they have been rather easy. They haven't been so easy for me. I don't really know why. I think it has to do with the temperature here. So in the summertime, it's okay. But in the wintertime, I have all sorts of issues, starting with blackening of the leaves and of the growing tips. Now that I think about it, very similar to what happened to the vanilla. The greenhouse is not very cold, but it is colder than my house. So maybe something of temperature imbalances or temperatures that they didn't like. Other than that, they did good for a lot of time, and you saw them, and at some point they just decided they don't want to stay with me anymore. So I'm slightly afraid with Hoyas. If I'm gonna get them again, I'm gonna keep them in the house somewhere. But yeah, not in the greenhouse. Sonia, you're asking if I ever tried to grow Phalaenopsis in water. I didn't, well, I kind of did. And it wasn't really my wish to grow them in water. I had to transition when I moved here. I had a very bad infestation of spider mites on my orchids, and I needed to spray them every day, and I had to move my orchids from a country to a different country, and I decided to keep them all bare-rooted. And how do I keep everything bare-rooted but hydrated at the same time when you have 150 orchids at that time? Put them in a little water. It didn't go so well for me. I personally don't really think it's a very appealing setup. I like other stuff, so it's not for me, but hey, I like to experiment, and if you want to experiment, go ahead and experiment. Just be careful to give them air because they're epiphytic plants, and just keeping them in water doesn't make sense. So make sure you give them air as well. Hector, you're asking if you can put all of your dendrobiums outside to take half a day of full sun, à la naturelle. I feel they are so bored inside the house. Well, you can, but again, make sure that you're not in danger of damaging anything. If they're just starting to grow roots, if the roots did not go inside the medium just yet, maybe be careful with moving them around because the root tips can actually get damaged. And particularly if you have an orchid which is wobbly, don't move that orchid. But if your dendrobiums are very well established and you don't think you're going to damage anything, you can move them. That really bright light will do them good. Just make sure you're not going to burn the, not the roots, the leaves. Jack, hi Danny, what is your opinion on potting media choices on the places where the temperature goes up to 40 degrees Celsius and extended summer and sphagnum moss and bark is not available? What is your media choice? Ooh, I think in your region you have charcoal available, which is not a good medium because it doesn't retain water, but I think you also have coconut husk. Maybe I'm wrong, but if you have coconut husk, that can prove to be a good medium. The only issue is that it could contain a lot of water. So if you can find a good brand that is specifically made for orchids, I would try that. If not, at the pet shop, you might be able to find coconut husk, but you have to prepare it. You have to soak it in water in buckets and then dump out the water every day for about 3 weeks or so, I think. If you Google it, you'll see the receipt, and then you can use it. But I don't know. I don't know how good it will be. It's very tricky with coconut husk. It can be very good, but it can also be bad. I will, however, give you another idea. Try Cocoa Choir. Do you know the IKEA Cocoa Choir medium that I used? If not, I will add a link down below. You can actually use that. It's a little bit fine, but you could use that if the environment is so dry. So Coconut Choir or coconut husk. Dania, is my non-toxic DIY insecticide work for snails too? No, it does not. What works for snails is hydrogen peroxide, 3%, that you can find usually at the human pharmacy. I would not use more than 3%, the concentration on the bottle. That one works great. I use it on orchid roots whenever I repot them, and I don't have any type of problem. Anna, hi Danny, if you could make the perfect Phalaenopsis orchid, how would it look like? Oh, such an interesting question. Well, to be honest, I know it's gonna sound a little non-creative, but I think I found my perfect Phalaenopsis in the form of the Anaconda hybrid. If you check my latest Orchids in Bloom video, you're gonna see it. I love little dots and little, let's say, wild patterns, and I love yellows and oranges and reds, and that orchid has all of these things on its flowers. So if I were ever to design an orchid, it will look like that. For me, that's the perfect Phalaenopsis orchid. But you know, it's a very personal thing, but lovely question. Brian is asking if the water from your fish tank is good for orchids. This is a long debate actually, and I do have a video on it if you Google it or YouTube it. The idea is that it really depends on your fish tank. You could have African cichlids, right? And that water is absolutely not good for orchids because it's very hard. You can have a fish tank which does not have any plant, but it only has a goldfish. That water would not necessarily be super good because it might actually be super high in nitrogen. If you have a planted tank, heavily planted tank, maybe that water would not be necessarily good either because it has no nutrients. Although if you're just looking for a source of soft water, then it might be good. So it depends on what you want from it and what type of aquarium. There are so many possibilities that it's hard to say, yes, it's good, no, it's not good. So many people use it, so many people don't use it. You can try it, but I don't think it's gonna do anything unless you just want something that is not tap water. Jaina, can you propagate a dendrobium through a broken cane or broken on transport? Yes, absolutely. You can do exactly what I did with these guys. You can cut sections. You can see that this portion of the pseudobulb has rings. Well, the dendrobiums have the very same rings, and from these rings you can actually have new growth sprouting, like in this case. So yes, if the cane is broken, I would just place it on top of a bed of sphagnum moss and just let it be. Keep the sphagnum moss rather damp, and you will see that sooner or later, most probably, it will create some keikis. Chris is asking what happened to the Habanera medusa that you once had in Romania. I bought some Habanera radiata, and I know that it grows in a similar condition. Any suggestions? Yes, I lost it when I arrived here. If you remember, it created those underground corms. I lost it here because I watered the corms when they were supposed to be dry, but I had no choice. It was a whole fiasco when I moved here, so that's what happened with it, but I want to buy it again. So if you want to buy it, I would definitely consider growing it like I did, and you can find many videos on it on my channel. Esteban is saying that Repot Me needs to come out with an emoji line of supplies. I know, right? And I know exactly what I would do, but yeah, that's not something that you can do very, very easy. And just because many of you asked, and I think this will be the last question that we're gonna take today because we're approaching the end of the stream. Many of you suggested when I started to come up with the merch, and I know this is not my merch, but you guys suggested that I come up with some self-watering pots and with stuff that I actually use. I would love to do that, but it is a very big thing to do. It's not that easy. It is a dream for me to come up with some orchid lines that I know will be good, but it's not easy. So I don't have anything in plan in the near future, not collaborations, not me personally, but who knows. I would love to do something like that. It's just not something that I'm personally prepared for. But yeah, let me know if I would come up with a sort of line. What line would you guys want? Would you guys like pots, stakes, accessories, baskets, or what exactly you would like most. Give me a comment after this stream is done and you have the video, or on any other of my videos. Let me know what type of products you would like, what you cannot find on the market, what you think you could improve, you can have an improved version of. I would be very interested to know, because I do have some ideas, but no possibility at the moment. So with that said, thank you, Patty. Yeah, I know, all of the above. With that said, thank you guys so much for joining today's live stream. I hope you've enjoyed it. And also, again, let me know if you prefer this type of Q&A more than anything, more than just talking about orchids. And with that said, I hope you have a great week. We'll see you tomorrow with a new video. And with that said, I wish you all a good night. Bye.